Hi, Todd VanDenburg here with VanDenburg Capital Management and another Uncommon Sense update. So it's the end of the third quarter, a few days after, but close enough. Um, and it started off with such promise. July was a really good month. Everybody was happy, and then August hit and sort of pulled some of those returns back, and then September hit and basically took all the rest of the profits for the third quarter out and then some. So we finished down for the third quarter, but for the most part, year to date, we're still in positive territory. But it's just been an up and down year, and this is due in no small part to what's going on with the Federal Reserve and their stated mission to lower inflation rates. Now, uh, Fed Chair Powell came out recently and said, at the last Federal Reserve meeting, that they still see that they're going to likely raise interest rates maybe one more time this year. They're not stating what they're going to really do beyond that, but they did set targets for what the interest rates might be over the next 2 years. So they're expecting that the Fed funds rate will go up to roughly 5.6% by the end of the year, but then come back down next year, 2024, to roughly 5.1. And then they're expecting by the end of 2025 that the Fed funds rate will be a full 2 points lower, 2 percentage points lower, down to about 3.1. So what this is telling us, at least based upon the data that they're putting out right now, is that they think that they're pretty close to the end of raising interest rates to try to do something about inflation, and that over the next 2 years they anticipate lowering them. So there's an opportunity here over the next maybe 12 months to take a look at your emergency fund and make sure that maybe you want to lock in maybe a 2-year CD or something to lock in the higher yields, because once the Fed funds rate drops back down to where the target is, 3.1% by the end of 25, you're not going to see the 5% CDs that you're seeing right now. So just be aware of that. I mean, it's nice for me because now for the first time in maybe 13 years, I'm able to actually get 5+% return on cash on money in money market funds and things like that, which makes it so much easier to have a balanced portfolio that has fixed income and equities in it. But because for the last 13 years, having money in cash was just a losing proposition. When they're only paying you 0.2, 0.3, 0.4 on cash, like what's the point, right? You're better off being in equities. But that's not really what I wanted to talk about today. What I want to talk about today is, well, want. I guess want would be not necessarily the right word. We got an election coming up, and it looks pretty clear, at least right now, that it's going to be another Trump v. Biden showdown. And I don't know about anybody else, but I'm not overly optimistic about the prospects of another Trump versus Biden presidential election, because it's just it's so polarized, our society, and that polarization has actually impacted the markets. So unfortunately, in spite of the what's going on in the Republican Party with their debates and stuff that Trump's not going to, unless something really unexpected happens, this time next year it looks like it'll be Trump versus Biden, and then the country's just going to have to decide which one of these candidates they're going to want to vote for, or at least which one are they willing to hold their nose and vote for, because the one is less smelly than the other. And as you can probably tell, I'm not overly enamored with either one of these candidates. I'm not saying that, like, for example, President Biden's a bad guy, but he's just he's rapidly approaching his good till date, and it's just sad to see so much pressure being put on somebody that is clearly having a hard time in his current job. Contrasted that with, former President Trump, who, I just don't think that the country's ready or wants to deal with another 4 years of mean tweets. So anyway, there's not a lot of good options there, but hopefully, again, what everybody knows I want from elections is I want divided government. The fiscal year just ended September 30th, and it looks like if all the numbers sort of end up where we think they're going to end up, that the federal government will have spent $1.7 trillion more than they brought in the last fiscal year. That's just unbelievable. And when the current administration starts patting themselves on the back because they lowered the annual deficit more than anybody else has ever done in the history of our country, I mean, come on, 1.7 trillion annual deficit is, an order of magnitude above where the historical norms were. I mean, for most of my life, if the annual deficit was 100, 200, 300 billion dollars, the government was at least politicians would talk about it like it was an existential threat to our country's financial future. And now here we are spending $1 trillion, almost $2 trillion more just this year. And that doesn't appear to be changing. So the reason I want divided government is so that the government basically passes fewer bills that continue to add to our national debt, which is over $33 trillion. Segueing into why I'm concerned about the national debt, if you think about where most of this debt was taken on, it's really been in the last 15 years or so, where huge chunks of this debt were borrowed, and it was borrowed at interest rates that were historically low. And here's the problem, and we're actually seeing it right now, is as these debt obligations that the U.S. government signed up for, the borrowing that they did, when the bonds that they issued to borrow that money come to maturity, they're having to refinance that debt at 2 and 3 times the interest rate that they had originally borrowed it at. And people that have listened to this update, prior to the last couple of years, or at least the last year, have heard me arguing the exact opposite side of that, because what we were doing is retiring debt from like the 90s or the 80s for a while, where the interest rates were ridiculously high, and we were retiring that debt and paying lower interest rates. Well, now we're on the opposite end of that. We've got huge chunks of debt that have been financed at really, really low rates. And so what happens is, starting in about 5 years, and for the next 20 years after that, if interest rates remain high, we're going to see the interest that we have to pay on our national debt just skyrocket. It went over the last couple of years from about $450 billion a year to roughly $1 trillion a year of just interest. And that number could continue to accelerate up to $1.5–2 trillion in not a very long period of time, if we don't do something about like our actual country's fiscal situation. So I'm not worried over the next 5 years in the short term about like the U.S. Having a financial meltdown. But if the government does what it typically does, they're going to drive this bus, the fiscal bus, right to the edge of the cliff, and even maybe put a couple of wheels off the edge before they do something to try to get our national debt and the interest under control. We cannot sustain annual deficits of $1.7 trillion. I would argue we can't sustain any more deficits at all. So over the next couple of years, we're going to be watching what happens to the interest on our national debt, what percentage of total federal revenue that interest is consuming, and then watching to see what the federal government does to try to not just continue to deficit spend at the rate that they've been doing it. These are risks that we're looking at that aren't in front of us, directly in front of us, So I'm not worried about, like what's going on right now as far as the markets or the economy, because as I mentioned earlier, in spite of the Federal Reserve, raising interest rates, it still looks like, according to some estimates, that corporate profits in the fourth quarter are expected to be up year over year about 8%. So the U.S. economy is still humming. There's still plenty of jobs to be had. Corporations are still turning profits, right? We're not on the edge of total collapse, but we're on a road that has a bridge out quite a ways down, and we got to do something to get off this road or get that bridge repaired. So just trying to sort of summarize some things that have been sort of top of mind and in the news lately. If anybody has any questions about this, interest rates, where to earn some good interest rates on your cash, money market, CD, just give me a call, send me a text, send me an email. I'm happy to reply to any message that anybody sends to me, because it's super important right now that interest rates on savings have come up. It's super important to earn every penny you can out of your emergency fund, so that when interest rates start to come down, you've got that extra money in the bank. So that was your update. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give us a like, give us a share, and I'll be back again soon with another Uncommon Sense update. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to be the first to hear of more Uncommon Sense updates like these, please click the subscribe button below. We'd really appreciate it. Thanks again.